Rasheeda and Kirk Frost had built their entire marriage on survival. But survival under the blinding glare of a reality TV spotlight is different from the survival required when blood, bullets, and a murder investigation crash into your life. For years, their marriage had been a public spectacle, a carousel of betrayals, reconciliations, and confrontations served up on VH1 like primetime entertainment. Millions watched as Kirk embarrassed Rasheeda with scandal after scandal, and millions watched as she swallowed the humiliation, pressed her lips into a smile, and turned her pain into storyline currency. They had been called toxic, unbreakable, fake, and iconic all at once, depending on the season. They had been dragged by castmates like K. Michelle, sparred with Mendices and Yendi, and withstood every insult the blogs could hurl at them. Their brand wasn't love, it was endurance. They were the couple too stubborn to quit, no matter how many times loyalty and dignity were shattered. But this time was different. This wasn't about infidelity or disrespect. This wasn't a scripted reunion fight with producers salivating in the shadows. This was a homicide investigation with their son's name written on the paperwork. This was a headline that said murder, not mess. The city of Atlanta was rattled to its core when T Hood, a 33-year-old rapper known in the underground circuit, was gunned down in a storm of bullets. For casual listeners, his name barely registered, another artist hustling for a chance. But for those who knew the streets, he wasn't just another aspiring rapper, he was Kelsey Frost's boyfriend. The quiet one who had always seemed like her anchor. He didn't chase cameras. He didn't create drama. He wasn't trying to turn his relationship into a storyline. In a family where chaos had become oxygen, T Hood looked like rare stability. And then, suddenly, he was gone, leaving not only his family but also the Frosts in the crosshairs of suspicion. Within hours of his death, grief turned into accusations. Social media erupted like a forest fire. Hashtags like #justice for the OD and #FrostFamilyExposed trended across platforms. Old Instagram photos were pulled up, captions dissected, body language analyzed like a crime scene. The amateur detectives of Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit sharpened their knives, convinced they could solve what the police had not. But the accelerant on this digital fire wasn't random, it came directly from T Hood's sister. In a voice trembling with rage and devastation, she went live on Instagram, calling out the Frosts by name. She claimed this wasn't random. She accused them of shielding their son Kai Frost, suggesting he had played a role in the killing, and was now being hidden, protected by his own bloodline. She used words like cover-up and shielded, words that carried enough poison to taint every headline, every rumor, every whisper in the city. And just like that, a tragedy became a scandal. Suddenly, the Frosts weren't just parents, they were suspects in the court of public opinion. Where was Kai? Why hadn't Kirk and Rasheeda spoken? Why did Kelsey's tribute to her boyfriend sound defensive instead of grieving? Was she mourning? Or was she trying to control the narrative? T Hood's sister accused her of betrayal, even suggesting Kelsey had lured him into a trap. Kelsey tried to fight back, posting tearful messages about heartbreak and begging for compassion. But denial doesn't go viral. Grief, accusations, and conspiracy theories do. And so, no matter how loud she shouted her innocence, the internet decided she was guilty of something, if not murder, then at least dishonor. The silence from Kirk and Rasheeda only made things worse. These were people who had always been quick to clap back at critics, to hop on Instagram Live and defend their name. This time, nothing. Their feeds froze. Their phones went quiet. They didn't appear in interviews, didn't post cryptic quotes, didn't even offer condolences to T Hood's family. Fans took that silence and bent it into their own conclusions. Some said it was proof of guilt. Others said it was smart that anything they said could later be subpoenaed, twisted, and weaponized. But silence doesn't stop gossip, it feeds it. And the vacuum they left behind was filled with speculation, conspiracies, and a growing suspicion that maybe this time, the Frosts weren't just in a storyline, they were in a crime story. Then came the TMZ bombshell. Gwinnett County Police had officially named Kai Frost as their top suspect. In one headline, the speculation hardened into state-backed suspicion. The Frosts' oldest son, the boy they had once tried to shield from the cameras, was now the centerpiece of a homicide investigation. The same blogs that had once covered Kirk's infidelity and Rasheeda's boutique launches now ran headlines with words like murder, cover-up, and witness. The Frosts were no longer just reality stars, they were a family facing the possibility of prison bars. The fallout was swift. Business deals started to wobble. Endorsements suddenly seemed fragile. Producers whispered about whether the Frost name was too toxic to touch. And the Love and Hip Hop cast smelled blood in the water. Some castmates posted vague prayers, their words crafted more like PR statements than genuine sympathy. Others resurfaced old beefs, mocking the Frosts for finally facing a scandal they couldn't spin. The long-standing feud with Mendici and Yandy, once the pinnacle of their drama, suddenly felt small, childish even, compared to this. Infidelity and shade looked like playground spats next to murder allegations. Meanwhile, the streets of Atlanta pulsed with whispers of corruption. Neighbors claimed there were cameras all around the Frost property. Yet police reports blandly said, "No footage available." That contradiction fueled the narrative of a cover-up. Anonymous accounts on Twitter posted cryptic messages, "Check the cameras, they already know." Screenshots flew across group chats, dissected like scripture. Activists called for transparency. Blogs screamed about payoffs and politics. People started connecting dots that may not have existed, but in a city fueled by scandal. Dots don't need to connect, they just need to suggest. Inside the Frost home, the tension was suffocating. Sources close to the family said Rasheeda barely slept, pacing the floors at night, clutching her phone as she read every accusation aimed at her children. Kirk, normally defiant, snapped at anyone who dared bring up Kai's name. He had always managed to spin his worst mistakes into survival, but this storm was too big for spin. It was swallowing them whole. The image of Kirk partying in a club, with his hoodie pulled tight, trying to slip through the back door while headlines branded his son a suspect, only made him look smaller, weaker, almost pathetic. The empire he had built on controversy was collapsing under a scandal too heavy to carry. Then came the vigil. T. Hood's sister, standing in front of candles and posters of her brother, grabbed the microphone with a voice that shook but didn't break. "We know who did this," she said, eyes burning into the cameras. "We know who's protecting him. And we won't stop until justice is served." The clip spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the hashtags multiplied. Memes painted the Frosts as villains. Bloggers turned the vigil into a battlefield for narratives. And the Frosts, still silent. Their refusal to respond only made the sisters' words sound truer, echoing across timelines as gospel. It was around then that rumors of evidence began to swirl. An anonymous envelope was allegedly delivered to Rasheeda's lawyer's office, filled with documents suggesting financial transfers tied to Kai. Whether the papers were authentic or fabricated didn't matter. The very rumor gave the public more fuel. TikTok detectives built timelines, matching phone calls to car rentals, Instagram captions to blurry photos, even outfits to shadows in leaked surveillance stills. Every post became evidence. Every like became suspicion. The Frosts weren't just being investigated by the state, they were being prosecuted by the internet. The story grew bigger than Atlanta. National outlets began covering it, not as gossip but as crime. Legal analysts speculated on whether Kirk and Rasheeda could face obstruction charges if it was proven they helped hide their son. The Frost name was now synonymous with corruption, cover-up, and scandal. Their silence, once seen as smart, now looked like arrogance. Their reputation, once shaky but salvageable, now looked radioactive. And yet, in the middle of it all, Rasheeda posted one photo on Instagram, a half-played chessboard with the caption, "Moves matter." The internet exploded. Was it a message to Kai, a warning to her enemies, a flex that she was still 3 steps ahead? Nobody knew, but everybody had an opinion. In that single post, she reminded the world that she wasn't just a grieving mother or a desperate wife. She was still playing the game. But this time, the board wasn't a reality show. It was a courtroom. And the stakes weren't ratings. They were life and death. They were life and death. The Frost family's silence had become a story in itself. Every day that passed without a statement, every time a lawyer said no comment, every moment that Kirk or Rasheeda avoided cameras, the speculation tightened around their necks, like a noose. The fans weren't patient, and neither was Atlanta. People demanded answers, and when they didn't get them, they created their own. The narrative spiraled into chaos, with conspiracy theories sprouting like weeds in the cracks of truth. Some swore Kai Frost had been sent out of the state, maybe even smuggled out of the country to avoid arrest. Others insisted that VH1, desperate to protect one of its most bankable families, had used its connections to scrub evidence, silence witnesses, and twist the narrative into something producers could still turn into a storyline. The silence wasn't protecting the Frosts, it was damning them. Then came the whispers of evidence. An anonymous Twitter account, claiming to belong to someone inside Gwinnett County Police, began dropping cryptic posts. Check the footage. It exists. And the tapes aren't gone. They're buried. Each vague message was treated like scripture by online detectives. Group chats lit up. YouTube commentators uploaded hour-long breakdowns. TikTok sleuths slowed the words down and overanalyzed punctuation like it held the key to the case. Could it be true that there was surveillance footage of that night? If so, who had access? And why wasn't it being released? The contradiction between what neighbors said and what police claimed only fanned the flames. Neighbors insisted the Frost property was laced with cameras, yet official reports blandly stated no footage available. That gap between reality and paperwork was all people needed to scream cover-up. The blogs ran with it, activists demanded transparency, and even mainstream news outlets began asking pointed questions. Was Atlanta law enforcement protecting the Frosts? Were producers leaning on their connections? Was this a story about a murderer? About power protecting itself? Inside the Frost home, the air was thick with dread. Rasheeda paced the floors, like a ghost, phone clutched in her hand, scrolling endlessly through posts, dragging her children as murderers. Friends whispered that she cried silently at night, refusing to break down in front of her kids. Kirk, once the loud, brash voice of the family, now cracked under the pressure. He snapped at assistants, shouted at business partners, and refused to answer questions about Kai. For a man who had once managed to spin even his most humiliating moments into survival, this was different. This wasn't a scandal you could outlast. This was a storm you couldn't filter away. And the pressure grew heavier when T-Hood's family decided to go directly to the press. At a candlelight vigil, his sister stepped up to the microphone, her voice breaking but her words piercing. "We know who did this. We know who's protecting him. And we will not stop until justice is served." That clip, raw and unfiltered, went viral. Within hours, #JusticeForTheOD trended nationwide. Blogs plastered the Frost's faces beside the words "Killer Family." Each day they stayed silent, the louder her voice became. And then came the envelope, delivered anonymously to Rasheeda's lawyer's office. It was a thick stack of papers with a simple note: follow the trail. Rumors exploded that the documents included bank transfers and receipts connecting Kai to suspicious payments, days before T-Hood's murder. Nobody could verify whether the documents were real, but it didn't matter. The very idea that they existed was enough to shift the narrative again. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a shooting, it was about money, cover-ups, and corruption at a level deeper than anyone imagined. TikTok detectives became forensic accountants overnight, building elaborate timelines of phone records, car rentals, and Instagram posts. They slowed down videos, matched outfits to silhouettes in grainy security footage, and created theories that went viral even if they weren't true. The Frost family wasn't just being investigated by the state, they were being tried by the internet, and the internet had already decided they were guilty. Legal analysts began weighing in on television. Obstruction, accessory, even the possibility of Kirk and Rasheeda facing charges if prosecutors believed they helped hide their scenario was debated. The Frost family's empire, already fragile, was now radioactive. Sponsors pulled away. Love and hip-hop quietly distanced itself. And even their so-called friends in the industry began shading them in cryptic posts. Through it all, Rasheeda broke her silence just once with a single Instagram post of a chessboard, half-played captioned, "Moves matter." It was enough to send the internet into chaos. Was she hinting at strategy? Was she sending a coded message to Kai? Was she mocking her enemies? Theories flew, memes spread, and the Frost brand became a crime drama in real time. As if the tension weren't enough, whispers of federal involvement crept into the story. Rumors spread that financial trails and suspicious transfers had attracted the attention of agencies more powerful than Gwinnett County. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Once the words federal investigation got attached to your name, the fear alone was enough to destroy you. The Frosts weren't just losing control of the narrative, they were losing control of themselves. For years, no matter what Kirk did, no matter how messy things got, they always managed to crawl back. But now they looked cracked open. Now the empire that had survived cheating scandals and humiliation looked ready to collapse under the weight of blood and bullets. And then came the whispers of a witness. An unnamed person, allegedly close to both Kai and T-Hood, was said to be ready to talk. No one knew their name. No one knew what they'd say. But the mere existence of a witness shifted the ground under everyone's feet. If someone in Kai's circle was willing to testify, the Frosts weren't just facing public opinion, they were staring down the possibility of betrayal from within. When the testimony leaked online before it even reached the courtroom, the internet exploded. A former friend of Kai's allegedly claimed that he had bragged about handling things the family way in the days before the shooting. Whether true or fabricated didn't matter, the damage was done. The Frosts weren't just accused of covering for Kai, they were painted as a family with its own code of silence. A household where loyalty was prioritized over legality. It wasn't just about one boy's choices, it was about a culture of secrets. T-Hood's family doubled down. They called out prosecutors publicly, demanding faster action, more transparency, harsher charges. "We will not let fame erase my brother's life," his sister declared. Her grief turned into a weapon. Her words were amplified across timelines clipped for TikTok, quoted by blogs. Each time she spoke, the Frosts sank deeper into the role of villains. Their silence looked like arrogance, their loyalty to Kai looked like complicity. And then came the footage. Grainy, incomplete, but enough to ignite the internet. Leaked clips, allegedly from a security camera, showed figures moving near the Frost property the night of the murder. No faces could be identified, but that didn't matter. Online detectives zoomed in, slowed the video down, matched builds to Instagram photos, and convinced themselves they had solved the case. The court hadn't ruled, but the internet had. In the court of public opinion, the Frosts were already guilty. By now, the Frost name was radioactive. Old accusations about Kirk's shady finances resurfaced, reframed as foreshadowing of the empire's collapse. Bloggers painted the Frosts not as a family, but as an organization, built on secrets and lies. VH1 quietly pulled reruns of their episodes. Business partners dropped them. Even longtime allies began pretending they had never been close. The Frost family was collapsing, not from the inside, but from every direction. And still, through it all, Kai Frost remained a ghost. Rumors of sightings popped up. Someone swore they saw him in a cousin's basement. Another claimed he was hiding in a distant suburb, but no one could confirm. His absence became its own scandal. Was he missing? Was he being hidden? Each possibility made the Frost family look IER, by the time the case reached its next hearing. The courtroom had turned into a theater. Bloggers camped outside. Fans lined up just to glimpse the Frosts, and every movement they made was dissected, as though it were a scripted reality show. Except this time, the cameras weren't VH1's, they were the world's. And the Frosts weren't being paid to perform. They were being forced to survive. By the time the Frosts returned to court, the atmosphere had shifted from whispers to outright spectacle. What had begun as rumors, leaks, and online speculation had hardened into a storm that no family could walk through unscathed. The courthouse itself became a theater, lines wrapped around the block. Bloggers with cameras fought for the best spot, and fans who had once cheered for Rasheeda's resilience now came to see her fall. Even the judge seemed aware of the circus, his stern gavel strikes echoing like an attempt to restore order in a world that no longer respected it. For years, Kirk and Rasheeda had turned their lives into entertainment. Now they were the unwilling stars of a true crime saga that blurred the line between reality TV and reality itself. The tension inside the courtroom was suffocating. When Kai Frost's name appeared on official filings, the gossip shifted from rumor to record. He was no longer a shadow being whispered about online, he was a suspect acknowledged by the state. Rasheeda sat stiff-backed, her face a mask of defiance and exhaustion, the kind of look worn by a woman who had been training for war her entire life. Kirk, once arrogant and loud, now looked hollow. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of every bad choice, every reckless betrayal, had finally collapsed onto him. Even Kelsey, who had once been seen as the innocent daughter caught between loyalty and grief, now looked hardened, her tears replaced with sharp glares at anyone who dared question her love for T-Hood. The younger children, Carter and Kingston, were dragged unwillingly into the storm, their faces turned into memes, their names tossed into hash. The Frost family wasn't just on trial, they were being dissected, piece by piece, by a public that treated them as if they were characters to be consumed, not humans struggling to survive. The bombshell came when whispers of the witness became reality. The testimony, leaked online before it even reached the court, was damning. A former associate of Kai's allegedly claimed that Kai had bragged about handling things the family way in the days before the shooting. That phrase, the family waiter, through the internet like a blade. Commentators dissected it, blogs repeated it, and fans quoted it as proof that the Frosts were operating under their own twisted code of silence and loyalty. Even if the statement was exaggerated or fabricated, it didn't matter. The damage was done. The Frosts were painted as a clan that valued protection over justice, secrecy over accountability. The courtroom wasn't just about Kai anymore. It was about the entire Frost household, a family accused of building their empire on secrets that had finally exploded into daylight. Outside, T-Hood's family turned their grief into activism. His sister spoke at press conferences, her tears weaponized into rallying cries. "We will not let fame erase my brother's life," she declared, standing before microphones that carried her voice to the nation, each word carved deeper into the Frost's battered reputation. Each clip went viral, reshared and reframed until the Frosts were villains in every narrative. Their silence looked less like strategy and more like arrogance. Their refusal to address the public became its own confession, and every time Rasheeda or Kirk walked into court without speaking, the world decided for them, guilty in spirit, if not yet in law. Then came the leaked footage. Grainy, incomplete, but devastating in the way it allowed imaginations to run wild. Figures moved in the driveway near the Frost property on the night of the shooting, their faces blurred by distance and darkness. To a courtroom, the tape might not have been conclusive. To the internet, it was already a verdict. Online detectives zoomed in, slowed frames down, and matched body builds to Instagram posts. They convinced themselves and millions of viewers that the Frost family was implicated. Whether or not the footage could stand in trial didn't matter. In the digital court of opinion, the Frosts were already condemned. The leaks didn't stop there. Reports surfaced that prosecutors had subpoenaed not just phone records but also financial accounts tied to shell companies allegedly connected to the Frosts. Old rumors about Kirk's shady money habits suddenly resurfaced, reframed as evidence of a darker empire beneath the surface. Bloggers feasted on it, painting Kirk not as a foolish husband, but as a man who had been laundering secrets for years, with this murder as the climax of his recklessness. The Frost family wasn't just accused of protecting Kai, they were accused of being an organization, a machine that had blurred the lines between family loyalty and criminal enterprise. And yet, even as the walls closed in, Rasheeda fought to maintain her image. She posted sparingly, but every caption was cryptic and defiant, designed to provoke speculation without providing clarity. One night, she went live not to speak, not to cry, but to sit silently in her boutique office with a folder labeled "Receipts" on the desk before her. She didn't open it. She didn't even acknowledge it, but the image alone sent the internet into a frenzy. What did she know? What had she kept? Was she threatening to expose something bigger than herself? Fans and haters alike dissected the symbolism until it became legend. Rasheeda didn't need to say a word, her silence was louder than any speech. Meanwhile, the courtroom hearings dragged on, each one feeling like a season finale. Lawyers sparred, evidence was teased, and new names were dragged into the spotlight. Old friends suddenly remembered incriminating stories. Former employees spoke to bloggers, describing the Frost household as a place where rules were bent and loyalty meant silence. Whether the stories were true didn't matter, the narrative had already cemented itself. The Frosts weren't just a reality TV family, they were a scandal, a cautionary tale about what happens when fame, family, and secrets collide. And yet, through it all, Kai remained a ghost. Rumors of his whereabouts swirled. Some claimed he was hiding in a cousin's basement. Others insisted he had been smuggled to another state. The fact that no one could confirm anything only deepened the suspicion. Was he missing? Was he being hidden? Each possibility made the Frosts look guiltier. The more invisible Kai became, the more visible the family's sins appeared. As the weeks turned into months, the Frosts found themselves isolated. Business partners cut ties. Networks scrubbed their faces from reruns. The once mighty Love and hip-hop Atlanta franchise distanced itself, re-editing episodes to erase them from its legacy. Even fellow castmates who had once fought for camera time alongside the Frosts now shaded them in subtle ways, pretending they had always known the empire would crumble. Friends turned into witnesses. Supporters turned into critics. The Frosts had built their legacy on survival, but now they looked like relics of a reality TV era that had finally imploded under the weight of truth. And yet, despite all the destruction, no final verdict had been reached. The case dragged on, motions filed, hearings rescheduled. No judge had slammed a gavel with the words, guilty or innocent. But in the court of public opinion, the Frosts were already serving a life sentence. Their brand was ruined. Their empire was ashes. Their names, once synonymous with endurance, were now tied forever to death. Perhaps the cruelest truth of all was that it didn't even matter what the final legal outcome would be. If Kai was acquitted, people would scream corruption. If he was convicted, the Frost name would forever be cursed. For Kirk and Rasheeda, there was no survival left in this story. They were no longer the couple who had withstood infidelity and humiliation, turning pain into plot lines. They were the family tethered to a murder. The family that silence could not save. The family that secrets had finally destroyed. And so, as the world kept watching, the Frosts did the only thing they knew how to do. They kept fighting. Rasheeda posted, Kirk tried to control narratives. Kai's name haunted headlines. And the children carried the burden of sins they never asked for. But no amount of fighting could erase the stain. The cameras that once made them famous now ensured they could never hide. There would be no reunion episode, no edit button, no storyline to rewrite, only the glare of truth, the endless echo of gossip, and the reality that this time, the cameras weren't controlled by producers, they were controlled by the world. The Frosts had survived scandals before, but this wasn't a scandal. This was a legacy-ending catastrophe. From stars to suspects, from survivors to symbols. They had become the cautionary tale of what happens when the walls between fame and family, between survival and silence,